if we are looking for our societies to be more democratic, then what we want is to increase the various people's interests, increase that everybody's interests, if you like, are represented in decisions that are being made. Now, participation is a good way of doing that. However, we would also want the interests of those who are currently underrepresented to be augmented. So participation is also a way of disenfranchised groups, oppressed groups, silenced groups, to improve their own say in how decisions are made, and by necessity that reduces the amount of representation of the interests of those who are currently well represented. If you like, it's a mechanism towards power sharing, or a shift in power away from those who currently hold it towards those towards a broader sense in which everybody is sharing in that decision-making process. But it is a process. Participation is not an event. It's not a technique. It's a process. It's a dialogue between those who are making decisions and those who are affected by the decisions. So I think it is a link to a lack of participation. I think it's also linked to bad participation. So people are invited to participate in a particular public meeting or something when things have got bad, when the bad decisions seem to be in the process of making. People come to a public meeting and then they feel they're not listened to. So that's not really participation. So if people experience that a few times, then they start thinking, well, what's the point? What's the point in going along to these public meetings, or what's the point in voting for these particular parties or whatever? So yes, very much so. It's not a healthy democracy when people feel that where they are invited to participate, it doesn't actually make any difference. So what you would want to do if you were making development planning decisions is to start from the perspective of, well, what do all those people who are affected by this area of land, what kind of interests are going to be beneficial in these different ways? We want to look at different options for this, how to develop this piece of land or not develop it. So let's involve as many of different groups as possible to look at, well, what criteria should we use, what different options are there, and then only at the end of that process would it be appropriate to then say, well, okay, how are we going to get the money to do what it is that's going to be in most people's interests? At the moment, those with the money make the decisions, and everyone else can only complain about it. Participation improves participation can certainly lead to better environmental outcomes. It doesn't happen automatically, and this is where I started with. It's the quality of the participation. Participation is not a one-off event. You can't do a survey and call that participation. Again, Raymond Williams' phrase, an educated and participating democracy. So people need to be used to that process whereby not just they pick one thing or another, but the criteria that they use, what is it that's going to really improve their quality of life? People get used to engaging in those kind of questions. At the moment, people are not used to engaging those questions. They're either asked to choose between 3 or 4 candidates in an election, or choose between one option or against one option in a planning decision, and so on. That's not a participating democracy. And the other thing of Raymond Williams' phrase is an educated and participating democracy. And I don't mean that in the narrow sense of people have to have degrees before they can participate or anything like that. An educated democracy means that people their participation from a point of view of inquiry, of wanting to know the reasons behind things, and that's where popular education comes in. Popular education is about a dialogue where it's recognized that everybody brings a distinctive form of knowledge. That knowledge needs to be respected, but also challenged, and it's challenged from all the different sides. So you get dialogues going on. It's only when we move towards those kind of processes that I believe that we will get a better environment. Things that affect us. And I think we should have a say in that. It's not just about having a say, it's this process of participation. Reform of schooling, for example, there's been a move towards more participation of parents in schooling, but it's in a very individualized way. So individual parents can dictate more to how a school is run and so on. Now that's not really a form of participation, again, because the rules were set up in a way that, well, you can participate in this kind of thing, but you can't participate in that kind of thing. It also means that inevitably parents are going to favor the interests of their own children as against their neighbors' children or whatever. So again, participation has got to have that collective sense that we are participating in order to promote the social good, the greater good, if you like. And that only happens where there's an ongoing process and people feel that their interests are not going to lose out if they are to support the greater good of the social interests. It's a long process, and in many ways we've been slipping away from that. People have been expected only to represent interests as individuals rather than as collectivities, whereas democracy itself was created, it was fought for by many people in different parts of the world in order to represent the collective interest. The greater good will be served by more people participating in democracy, whether that was the creation of the franchise, universal franchise, which many people struggled for, many people campaigned for, through to where we are now, where we have the franchise, universal franchise in nearly all parts of the world, but we also have the greater power of capital and a highly individualized culture that's being dictated to us. Education is central. People need to, all of us need to understand what is the best way of promoting the interests of those who are excluded, those who are currently excluded, or what knowledge is going to help in that process. We don't know. Nobody knows what knowledge. The only way that we can decide what knowledge is useful, what forms of institution, what forms of decision making, what bits of specialist technique, the only way we're going to find out what is really useful is through that dialogue process with those who are disenfranchised. I'd like to see popular education replace that kind of education, so that it's popular education can occur in institutions, as I say, and it would be great if there were opportunities to do that. But you're right. What formal education does is give certain groups of people the power to select the knowledge which is supposed to be good for usually young people. So it's a way of selecting from the culture what they would want their the next generation to enact. And that's in itself, that's not bad, because some of that selection might be good, some of that selection might be bad. But what's the problem is that it gives a lot of power to those who are doing the selecting. But students are not stupid. Students can also ask difficult questions of that selection. And that's when you start to get a dialogue, when you get some argumentation, that people are asking the critical questions. And so popular education does break through, and some contexts can make it easier and some contexts can make it more difficult. So I wouldn't I wouldn't say that, you know, institutions have to disappear for popular education to happen. Ivana talked about deschooling society, which I think is a good thing, which doesn't mean to say that schools shouldn't exist. If you go to places like, I go to India quite a lot, where a lot of people don't have access to schools, and that's disempowering. Not having schools is not the empowering thing, but deschooling is actually turning schools into something that are democratic, where the knowledge is negotiated, the knowledge emerges out of a dialogue through people working collectively. I think the issue is about the knowledge, and it's clear that, you know, young people have less access to knowledge than adults because they've been around for longer. So it's the responsibility of the adult teacher to create that opportunity for dialogue through investigation, through asking questions, through critically engaging, asking critical questions about things, if you like. I mean, I think perhaps it's easier for me to draw on my experience of working in a university setting, which is rather because I've not actually worked in schools. But I mean, through my work with Friends of the Earth Scotland, we made a connection with a university, Queen Margaret University, where I now work, which was education for and with communities who are affected by pollution or other forms of environmental injustice. The way that we put it together, there were certain kinds of knowledge that we insisted was useful, we being both Friends of the Earth and the university. And we insisted it was useful because of the experience of scholarly research and so on. But at the same time, there was a lot of knowledge that was part of the course that the participants insisted was useful, and we didn't. And so a lot of the content of the course came out of a negotiation. And I remember very, very distinctly that there were times when the students came to us and said, we don't think what you're teaching us is very useful. So we had to have a very difficult dialogue with them, where we had to justify why we thought this particular bit of economic theory or political theory was useful. And at the end of the day, there were some bits which we convinced them, yes, it was useful, and there are some bits where we didn't convince them, and you know, we had to drop some bits, and yeah, you can't tell what is actually useful. Nobody has that overarching insight. You can only know what's useful by having that dialogue and having that argument, and that's education. The question is, what criteria do you want to use for somebody who's going to provide knowledge which is really useful for creating a better world? Mm. Now, you might say what we want is a nuclear physicist who's going to provide us with particular bits of knowledge about something that's going to help us in this. And so you might want to look for a qualified person for that. Or you might want to say, well, we need to understand something about an illness. Yeah. So we might want to say, well, one source of knowledge about illness is to speak to those who are qualified as doctors to treat that. But you also would want to say, well, another source of knowledge about illness is the experience of people who live with that illness. So that's the criteria you want to judge that teacher for. So a popular education involves looking at what kind of knowledge is going to be really useful to this particular collective, which is the students who are learning. And identifying who it is that's going to be able to provide that. Another part of that equation is finding a teacher who maybe doesn't have the knowledge but has the skills in drawing that knowledge out of people who do. or maybe not the people who do, but the sources. It may be somebody who knows how to use the internet in a sophisticated way, has the critical capacity to be able to discern what is on the internet, which is reliable, what that's testable, and so on. What on the internet is rubbish, or it's just somebody's opinion, or whatever, and be able to discern those things. That's a set of skills. That's part of the education as well. So popular education engages in all that process. It's about because it's about dialogue. It's about constantly asking questions about, on what grounds can you say that? And somebody might say, I can say that because I'm a fully qualified doctor. Somebody else says, I can say that because I've spent 20 years living with HIV or whatever it is. Or somebody else might say that because, well, for all different kind of reasons. A great example of popular education is the MIT, the landless people's movement in Brazil, where they elect their teachers. And they can, if they decide that a teacher's knowledge is if you like, no longer useful, then they find another teacher who's got knowledge that's useful. But the criteria is how useful is the knowledge that this person brings to us.